Good afternoon and welcome. Okay, we're ready to begin the Finance Committee meeting. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. The first item on our agenda, Dr. Bergstock, is the resolution.
You want to turn your mic on?
There you go. The first order on our agenda is the resolution 2122-20, number 21, which will come to the board on June 9th. And this grants the superintendent permission to spend any remaining funds at year end and gives a list of those items. So I'm going to quickly go over to that and read you kind of the list of items. They are not in priority order at this point. We're still getting all the quotes in and things, and Dr. Gordon and myself, as well as others, will put them in priority order once we get all the information in. But we're looking at up to 10 buses, 77 passenger with air conditioning, 12 vans, 7 trucks, 6 vehicles, all of which are older than 2005. A fuel tank installation at Florence Bowser Elementary School. Most of that fuel tank was, if you remember, paid for by the construction of Florence Bowser. But after construction, there was some consternation as to the location of that tank. And at the very last end of that project, it was decided that in the best interest of students and the flow of buses through that campus to move that tank. Most of that was covered by the project, but there was about $46,000 that is not covered by that project for fencing and other things that the city requires. Professional painting at Creekside Elementary and Kings Fork Middle School, sewage pump station at Nansman Parkway Elementary School, restroom partition replacements at Lakeland High School and Nansman River High School, the turf field for Nansman River High School, fire lane and parking lot line painting. It sounds like something that's very easy, but that is actually a project all on its own. For all schools, replacement of 6-year-old copiers at various schools. As they get to be 6 years and older, the downtime for teachers is much greater. And of course, since we're mostly relying on copiers now, not individual printers, it's imperative that we keep those up to date. Hot water system valve replacements at various schools. Of course, the sinkhole repairs at various schools. Furniture replacement for non-student at various schools, and then furniture replacement for students at various schools. And then really that students also includes teachers. We've had lots of requests for rolling desks and other things as teachers move around the classroom with these interactive boards. In addition, playground replacements, the last ones we have before Northern Shores are MacBen Junior Elementary and Oakland Elementary School. There's a camera scope of the drainage field at Kings Fork High School to determine the scope of the remaining repairs there. Paving of several parking lots, and then also the Virginia Preschool Initiative playground replacement at several schools. So where we have pre-K at some of our schools, we're looking now to start those playgrounds to begin replacing those. Again, these are not in priority order at this point. We're still trying to see which quotes we can get in and what estimates and what's going to come back to us. And then they will go into a priority order as we begin to close the year down and find that there's money available here or there. We will then begin to obligate these items through June 30th.
And just to add to that, thank you, Ms. Forsman, for that detailed list. Dr. Buck, this is something that we actually do every year. Right. Where we want to make sure that, because we know that the ordering of many of these items will actually go over 2 fiscal years, we try to order it during this fiscal year because we know they won't arrive sometimes, especially right now for our supply chain issues until after July 1. So the list that Ms. Forsman gives, one of the additional aspects of research that we're going to get and work on is receive time for these things, which will also help us to put it into priority order.
Right, and we've done this every year. We encumber the funds every year at the end of the year so that we can make sure that when they come, we're ready for those.
Correct. And all of these items, if you look, are not items that are specific in our budget at this time because we just don't have the ability to add every single thing that we need or may need in our budget. We don't have that luxury.
Right. Okay.
Any questions on that?
No, because this is a process that we've followed for the 10 years that I've been on the school board.
And that resolution will come before the whole school board for them to vote on in June. The reserve accounts that we talked about the last time we met, the city manager did deny that request to set those reserve funds up. So we have two options here that we will look at. I will recommend one of them, but I just wanted to give you, the Finance Committee, a chance to hear what the two options are, because we're not allowed to carry forward funds. We're not allowed to do anything that's going to not be obligated. And so because of supply chains and it taking 24 months to get some of this fleet, it's impossible for us to obligate it this year, knowing we won't get it for 24 months.
Right.
Without going back to the city for reappropriation, then there's no point in obligating it if you're going to do that. So we have two options. One would be to work with the city to get an MOU in place whereby any of those excess funds that would be used for fleet are transferred into a specific capital project called fleet replacement for the schools. And then we just move that money over there and spend it as we normally do anything with a CIP project. The second option would be to only obligate fleet purchases that can be made within a fiscal year. So, for instance, knowing it's 24 months, I would not obligate fleet at the end of this year. I would obligate it in July, knowing that I had that 2-year cycle to get it.
Right.
And so therefore, for us, we feel like option B is probably better at this point because we want to have access to our money and not put it over in CIP projects where the city could then potentially, and they don't do it without our permission most of the time, but potentially move it around or take it as they've done with some other cities in the past. Some other cities have done that with their schools. So we want to make sure that we obligate those items that we do need and that we have control over when and how we purchase those items. So we would recommend option 2 to the Finance Committee as what we would do from now on.
Okay, so option B would be
Yes.
only to obligate the purchases, as we have done.
As we have done, yes.
This would be our traditional action, as
Right.
we have done, only to obligate the purchases that can be made within the time.
Yes, ma'am.
And then not be concerned about those
And then not be
things. If we
going
don't
back and
get-
forth with the city.
If we don't get it, we won't worry about it.
Exactly.
And I know that the suggestion came from the auditors to get the funds and do the other thing that we were going to do, to have the escrow accounts.
Right.
That was the recommendation of the auditors when the auditors came. But since the city manager is not allowing that, and they do have that right not to allow that, we can go on
Yes, ma'am.
to what we traditionally do.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
we'll move forward with that.
So that's the plan, is to move forward as normal.
Okay.
All right. So then the next item would be the state budget. Of course, we still do not have a state budget, as you're
No.
aware. And so the plan at this point is to hopefully have a state budget in the next couple of weeks and send out contracts as normal. If not, we have a backup plan to that that includes an intent letter and information to all of our staff. But we hope to have the budget in the next week or so, and that should alleviate us having to do all that. But I just wanted you to be aware, of course, that we have no budget, and of course, with no budget, we really can't approve or
We can't,
adopt a
right,
budget,
right.
not knowing where we stand.
Well, you know, one of the things that I was concerned about when I realized that we didn't have a budget, and as we normally send out contracts, I was in a meeting earlier today with CSEP, and we were concerned about that. And CSEP, of course, as you well know, because you pay the bill, we have Norfolk Public Schools is running that, and they have a clause in the contract that suggests what we can pay. And I was trying to figure out what we could do if for any reason the governor doesn't do what he is supposed to do, or not if he's supposed to do. Let me clarify that, because I can't put the onus on the governor, because there are 3 bodies that work together. The legislative body has to work with the governor, and they have to come up with what they have to come up with. But at any rate, when the 3 bodies can't get together to come up with the budget, and agreement on the budget, if they don't get the budget in time for us to do what we are obligated to do by law and get the contracts out to teachers and the staff in the time frame that we are allowed, can we give contracts with that caveat in there that this is what we're going to pay you if the budget is approved? Is there a clause that we can put in teacher contracts, or are we allowed to do this? Because I know that's what's going in the CSEP contract. If, for those persons, if you'll get this salary if this budget is approved, but if it is not approved, there may be an adjustment in the salary.
Yeah, we basically, that's part of the reason why Ms. Forsman has specifically mentioned the intent letters, because that onus of kind of what you're describing could create a lot of confusion. So one of the things that we plan on doing is stating on the intent letter, if for some reason we don't have a state budget by the time our teachers leave, here's the amount of money that we are planning to pay you for 22-23 with a state adopted budget. But the current contract would unavoidably had to revert back to the current year. And so the intent letter would describe that entire process, because we're still looking at basically a 5-day windows for any staff members to have to sign their contracts. Now, we have decent insight to believe that hopefully that won't be an issue with that June 1st deadline being thrown around amongst many of our legislators locally as well as statewide. And I had a chance to talk with some members of the House and Education and Finance Committee at the event we were at yesterday, just to make sure that that was still going to be the case. So we're still going to have probably a 5-day window to sign that. We could have went the route that you were describing, that they were talking about with CSEP, but we actually believe that puts more of an onus on the budget and finance team where multiple contracts could be out at the same time.
Okay, I see.
And it does cause lots of confusion when they see one number and it becomes
And
another
it becomes
number.
another number. Yeah,
It just creates
it's hard to put
havoc.
the genie back in the bottle.
That's right.
Right,
And you end
right.
up with people leaving because they think that you didn't tell them the truth. And so it's better to give them here is scenario intent. This is what we really want to do for you if we have a budget, but stick with your current salaries if we don't have a budget. As you know, several years ago, the state promised a budget and then backed up on it.
Absolutely.
And that was only 2%, so it was not as big a deal. But these salary increases are much larger, and we would not be able to cover them if something were to happen. So we have to be careful.
I understand.
All right, so the other next item would be the increase in grants appropriation. We did send to the city manager a letter that discussed the need for additional appropriation in the grants funding. Let me get that up here real quick. Basically, a couple things happened, a couple of ways that we do grants. Grants always have carry forward, and we account for that in our budget process. We account for what our normal carry forwards are in the budget process. As you all know, with the supply chain interruptions and everything, we ended up carrying over quite a bit more money than we had planned to because it wasn't able to be purchased and the expenses in last year. So some of those expenses, a lot of those expenses carried forward this year. In addition, CARES 3 brought us $19,000 more money. Title 4 brought in $510,000. We received school improvement, school-based mental health, special ed transition, 21st century, an ESSER bus driver transition incentive, a COPS grant, an epidemiology grant, and then ARP 1 and 2 for Project Hope. All federal grants that came in after the budget, after everything was said and done, that are $3.4 million. We will not spend all that money this fiscal year. However, what happens is, one of the things that the auditors do to double check us, which is a good thing, is they go to the state grant system and they say, okay, how much money does Suffolk Public Schools have in the state grant system? If we do not have that same amount of money on our books in budget, then we get an audit comment because it has to match.
Right.
We don't have the authority to put that money on our books at this point for all this new stuff. So we have to go back and ask for that money. So in the first meeting in June, the city will take this up next week. There's also additional for some state grants for career switcher and technology that were added. So the total is $4.1 million for the additional request. And that is all grant funded. And again, not all of it we spent this year, but we have to have it reconciled to the state system to make sure that we're in compliance. So it's really a compliance thing for us.
And Ms. Forsman, you want to just go into any additional detail that this also isn't a new process where we've kind of had carryover in the past?
Right.
And I love the fact that you're reinforcing that this is grant funds that actually has already been allocated for us.
Right.
We just have to go through the process of actually officially asking for permission because it's actually under the City of Suffolk umbrella.
Exactly. So anything that we receive, we have to have appropriated by the city, whether it's
Absolutely.
grant fund or otherwise. So that has to be done. So we're only asking the city to give us the money that has already been appropriated to us by the state.
By the state.
In order to have the ability to spend it. And again, we won't spend it all this year, but because it has to match what the state's system has, we need to put it on our books.
Put it on the books, okay.
Can't put it on our books unless I have it appropriated and approved. Now, this will come to the board on the 9th. Once the city council approves it on their first meeting in June, then it will come to the school board on the 9th to approve the increase in the grants fund from $55 million by this $4 million to $59 million.
Okay.
And so, and as you'll see from the financials this month, you'll see where we've only spent about $12 million this year. So it seems like a lot of money to not spend it, but we are required to still go through the process regardless of the money.
And with the epidemiology money,
Yes.
is that money, I would think, that's what my daughter does, it's for tracking diseases. Is this money associated with of course, our COVID?
Mm-hmm.
And does this money help us with, do we know that this money will help us with our nurses and our tracking, help us hire people to sort of track and see what's happening with that?
Right, they've actually
That's been
hired a
concern
nurse under
of
this.
mine.
Right, they've
Okay.
actually hired a nurse under this.
That's what I
program.
was wondering, if
Yes.
this is what is going to help us keep
Yes.
track and make those contacts to find out where this disease is going.
Yes, ma'am.
The other thing that I wanted to ask was I know we asked for and had in the budget, and we have special ed transition services. This money helps us with the special ed transition services. Now, with that, it can't give us a position, but will it help us give more hours to the persons or get some more aids or whatever with that, or more materials for it, or what kinds of things can we do with that?
We have actually used it in many of the same ways you just described.
Okay.
Where it's to help assist any folks that were tracking our kids once they leave SBS.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
also, we've used it in the past, or I know other school divisions have used in the past, let me reframe that, to buy a program to help with the transition itself.
Okay.
And that also includes placement for
Technology
work.
and placement. I got you. Okay. And so, and will this school-based mental health, will that help us with SEL kinds of things?
That is full-fledged mental health. As a matter of fact, Dr. Brown's team has been working actually from some support that they've gotten from Ms. Jenkins on that. And that was the amount, Ms. Forsman, you want to go into any greater detail that we saw for programs for both student and staff?
Students, if it's a telemental health
Oh,
program
okay.
that does both.
Okay.
Some of it is covered under care, but this particular one is school-based. So there's a
Okay,
piece of it that's
school-based mental health.
school-based, and there's a piece that is for staff. And so it's a telemental health program that does everybody.
Oh, okay. All right. And then the last question I have is about the Career Switchers program. Do we have one are we working with a particular university, or when we bring in career switchers, are we giving them like mentor teachers or something with that money?
Yeah, that's actually a partnership that comes from the DOE to help to improve the teacher workforce. So the money that is being paid is also some of it's for the program certification and or tuition reimbursement, but it's
Okay.
also part of the school-university partnerships.
Okay.
So that we can take our provisional folks that are coming from career switchers and make them fully endorsed teachers. So
Okay.
they've been doing that for years.
Yeah, I know, because when I was when I was at Hampton as chair of the education department in the early 2000s, we were doing career switcher kinds of things, and so I know that was implemented earlier in this century. And I was just wondering how that was going, what we were doing with that. But thank you.
And many of these items were already in our budget, but this is above and beyond what we were expecting to receive. And so we've received, as you know, that a lot of money has been flowing from the federal government through the states to school divisions, and this is just part of those items that are done. And so we give it a good estimate back in the spring of, in February, but, when it actually comes in October, sometimes it's higher than that.
Than what we
And
thought
usually
would
we're pretty good about having enough of a cushion to not worry about it, but because so much has been flowing, this just was too much this year. So as we did our review, we realized that it was going to be over and that we needed to make sure that we took care of that.
Yes, and just to piggyback on that, as you can see, Dr. Buck, how we have this laid out, we've already earmarked where this money is going to go.
Right.
So it can't be used for anything else
It's gotta be used
besides
for
what
what
Ms.
it's on.
Forsman and the team has already placed on the application that the state has approved.
Right.
And prices have changed. Of course,
Absolutely.
because of supply
Absolutely.
and demand, but we also at the same time have to make sure that we keep things in the appropriate fiscal year.
Absolutely. And we keep it, and we spend it in the way that's supposed to be spent. All right. Well, thank you.
That's it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And that's really all I have.
Okay. All right. Did you have a question, Ms. Story, about any of what you've heard? Because this is just informational. Okay. All right, and this is going to come to the board.
June 9th.
Okay. All right. And I'll tell you what, if we, I think since it's informational and since we'll have this, it'll just come to the board for a vote. Is
Yeah,
that
we
what we're
can- we
doing
can-
once we get, because I was going to say, okay. Because when we have the presentation, it'll come to the board, just trying to figure out whether we need to put it like in a work session or whether we need to, so people can ask questions, or whether we need to put it. But it's got to come before the
It's an
board
action
for a
item.
decision, so it's going to be in the business board. Okay,
Okay.
all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. I guess that's,
Say the meeting's adjourned.
I guess that we can say, if all minds are clear. Thank you very much. The meeting's adjourned.